Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. New York, late afternoon. The setting sun cast golden reflections on the skyscrapers, but inside the Manhattan Diner restaurant, the atmosphere was far from warm. The crisp white tablecloths, silver cutlery, and glittering chandeliers created an air of luxury, but an invisible unease hung in the air. Sarah Johnson, a waitress for 10 years, moved between the tables with understated elegance. She knew every customer, every dish, every request, but nothing ever seemed to be enough for Richard Bates, the arrogant and demanding manager. Today, he had decided to make her pay for a minor mistake, a poorly arranged tray. "Sarah," he yelled, his voice booming like thunder. "How can you still do this? Even an intern could have done better." Sarah's cheeks flushed with anger and humiliation. Her colleagues looked away in embarrassment, while some customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. But at the back of the room, a teenager watched. Emily Johnson, Sarah's 17-year-old daughter, held her violin close. She had grown up in the shadow of others' desires, but not tonight. Tonight, something was boiling inside her, a mixture of pride, anger, and determination. She relived every moment her mother had been belittled, every humiliating remark, every condescending smile from Richard Bates. Her hands tightened on the violin bow, and a sparkle shone in her eyes. She was going to speak, but without words. Her music would say it all. At that moment, Emily made a silent vow: if life wanted to humiliate her family, she would respond with skill and courage, and no one in that room could ignore the strength of a girl who refused to be silent. Destiny had just charted his course. What followed would forever mark Richard Bates, his mother, and all those who had believed that talent and dignity could be crushed. The day after her mother's humiliation, Emily returned home with a heavy but determined heart. Their small Brooklyn apartment seemed smaller than ever, but this was where all the magic could begin. She placed her violin on the bed and stared at her mother, who sat silently in the kitchen, still shaken by the scene in the restaurant. "Mom, I'm going to do something," Emily said softly, her eyes burning with determination. Sarah looked up, worried. "Emily, I don't want you to get into trouble." Emily shook her head. "This isn't for me. This is for you. So we can show Richard Bates that no one has the right to humiliate us." She had heard about the annual charity gala, an event where Richard Bates was scheduled to deliver a speech in front of New York's elite. It was the perfect opportunity. Emily knew that if she performed in front of all those guests, her talent would be impossible to ignore, and Richard's shame would be exposed. For hours she thought about every detail. How to enter without attracting attention from the start. The way to choose the music that would tell their story's silent story. Each note had to convey the emotion it had felt when seeing his mother humiliated. That evening, Emily sat by her window, bow in hand, and let the music flow. The notes, both gentle and powerful, seemed to recount all the injustices she had seen. Every vibration of the violin reinforced her conviction: this was not just a plan for revenge, it was a performance for justice and dignity. She knew the road would be difficult, and that Richard Bates would never accept ridicule without a fight. But Emily wasn't looking to fight back with words or shouts. Her music would be her voice. And once she began playing in front of the gala, everything would change. The days that followed were intense for Emily. Every morning after class, she retreated to their small living room, which had been transformed into a rehearsal room. The walls were covered with photographs of famous musicians, and every note she played on the violin seemed to resonate with her deepest emotions. Emily knew her performance had to be perfect. She couldn't just play beautiful notes, every vibration had to convey the anger, pride, and humiliation her mother felt. Every pause had to create suspense, every crescendo had to captivate the audience. She spent hours rehearsing her chosen piece, an ancient and dramatic piece, blending gentleness and power, quiet emotion and bursts of musical light. Sometimes she would stop, violin in hand, staring into space, wondering if she was ready to face Richard Bates in front of the entire elite. Sarah, discreet but attentive, observed her daughter with admiration and concern. Emily, "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked timidly. Emily smiled, determined. "Mom, I have to. Not just for you, but for me too. It's time we showed that no one can crush us." Tensions mounted as the gala date approached. Emily began to imagine every detail: the lighting, the guests' reactions, the exact moment Richard would open his mouth and realize he was the silent target. She could feel adrenaline coursing through her body with each rehearsal, but also a thrill of excitement. The rematch was going to be spectacular, yet elegant. The night before the gala, she stayed up late, practicing the piece by the dim lamplight. The last notes echoed through the silence of the apartment, and Emily knew, deep down, that she was ready. She had transformed her anger and pain into something beautiful, powerful, and unforgettable. The next day, she would enter the grand gala hall with one goal: to silence arrogance and humiliation through music. The long-awaited evening had finally arrived. The annual charity gala was being held in the lavish Grand Lexington Hotel, its large glass doors reflecting the golden lights of Manhattan. New York's elite, dressed in impeccable evening gowns and tuxedos, exchanged pleasantries, calculated smiles, and curious glances. Emily and her mother entered quietly through a side entrance. Sarah felt her heart racing, but her daughter's determination inspired her. Emily, violin in hand, walked confidently forward, head held high, her eyes scanning the room for Richard Bates. And there, in all his arrogant arrogance, stood Richard, surrounded by his privileged guests. He laughed loudly at his own jokes, completely oblivious to the world around him. His confidence seemed unshakable, until Emily took her seat. Emily chose a strategic spot near the stage where the speech would take place. No one expected to see a teenager appear like this, alone, with only a violin. Murmurs began to ripple through the room. Richard Bates, intrigued, finally looked away from his guests and spotted Emily. He frowned, amused by what he considered a trivial distraction. "Who let this kid in here?" he murmured, thinking she would just go unnoticed. But Emily wasn't there to go unnoticed. She took a deep breath, felt the adrenaline rush, and placed the bow on the strings of her violin. A surprising silence fell over the room as she began to play. Each note flowed with precision and emotion, soft yet charged with power. The guests turned, captivated by the pure, intense sound that filled the room. Richard's eyes widened. What he thought was a harmless teenage girl had just captured the entire attention of the room, and, for the first time, he felt vulnerable. Emily had begun her silent performance. It wasn't just music, it was a statement, a clear message to the man who had humiliated her mother. And every look she gave Richard, every vibrant note, reminded him that she was there to change the course of this evening. Emily took a deep breath, feeling every fiber of her body vibrate with anticipation. The murmur of the guests had gradually died away, replaced by a silence heavy with curiosity and tension. Richard Bates, his arms crossed, stared at her with an expression both mocking and intrigued. Then Emily placed the bow on the strings of her violin. The first note rose, clear and pure, crossing the room like a ray of light piercing the darkness. The guests, surprised by the beauty and precision of the sound, turned towards her. Even the waiters, motionless in the shadows, held their breath. Each subsequent note told her mother's story: humiliation, patience, and stricken dignity. The melody was gentle yet powerful, as if the violin itself bore the weight of all the injustices Sarah had experienced. Richard Bates stiffened. He slowly realized that this wasn't just a performance to entertain the audience, it was a silent, masterful warning. Every crescendo seemed to point directly at him, every insistent note revealing his arrogance and injustice to all the witnesses present. Emily, focused, let her anger and pride guide her bow. She played with the precision of a virtuoso and the emotion of a teenager determined to defend her family. The guests were captivated, hanging on every vibration, almost ignoring the director's planned speech. For Richard, every second was torture. He saw his own arrogance exposed before the city's elite, unable to retort, unable to look away. The girl he had underestimated had just transformed the gala into a scene where he was nothing more than a humiliated spectator. As the melody intensified, the emotions in the room became palpable. Murmurs of admiration and astonishment could be heard. Eyes increasingly turned toward Emily, until a heavy, respectful silence enveloped the room once again. The decisive moment had arrived. Emily had captured everyone's attention and imposed her presence irrefutably. Emily felt adrenaline pumping through her veins. The first part of her performance had captivated the room, but she knew the decisive moment was approaching. Every note she played now had to be even more powerful, more expressive, more undeniably sincere. She tilted her violin slightly, took a deep breath, and let out a masterful crescendo. The strings vibrated with incredible intensity, transforming the space into an almost otherworldly atmosphere. The guests were captivated by Emily's every movement, mesmerized by her mastery and emotion. Every note seemed to tell his mother's story: patience in the face of humiliation, dignity trampled, the quiet strength of a woman no arrogant man could crush. And at the center of this musical story was Richard Bates, frozen in his now cracked arrogance. He felt his face flush, his pride crumble under the weight of the melody. The guests, aware of what was happening, exchanged surprised and admiring glances. They realized that a teenage girl had just transformed a simple dinner into a lesson in courage and talent, and that the most arrogant man in the room was losing all authority. Emily wasn't just playing to impress, she was playing to right injustice, to make visible what was invisible, the pain and resilience of her family. Every vibration of the violin seemed to whisper, "You can no longer humiliate my mother. You can no longer ignore our dignity." Richard tried to smile, to look away, but it was too late. Each note struck his pride with relentless precision. The applause, tentative at first, began to rise, inspired by the dramatic intensity of the performance. Emily had found her voice in the music, and that voice spoke louder than any words Richard Bates could say. The entire room held its breath, suspended in suspense by the power of a determined teenager, by the grandeur of a music that said everything it could not express otherwise. Emily had not only captured the attention, she had taken control of the stage and the story. As the final crescendo faded, the room fell into an almost sacred silence. Every guest held their breath, awed by Emily's virtuosity and emotion. The applause hadn't yet begun, but the message was clear: Richard Bates was now on display before all. The director, red-faced and stiff, was unable to reply. His eyes flicked from Emily's bow to his violin, then to the guests, as if searching for a way to reclaim his lost authority. But there was nothing to be done. Every note had shaken his arrogance, and the entire room had witnessed his silent fall. Emily gently lowered her violin and turned to him, her gaze determined but calm. Not a word, not a direct accusation. Just a meaningful silence. Every spectator understood immediately that this silence was more powerful than any words. A waitress's daughter had just reminded the most arrogant man in the room that he had no right to belittle anyone. Murmurs began to ripple through the room. Guests exchanged glances of admiration for Emily, and some nodded in respect to Sarah, who looked at her daughter with tears of pride. Richard Bates, isolated in the center of this collective admiration, felt shame wash over him. His power, hitherto unchallenged in the restaurant and the gala world, had vanished in a matter of minutes thanks to the virtuosity and courage of a teenage girl. Emily didn't rush to collect the applause. She waited a few seconds, letting the silence mark the depth of her performance. Then, slowly, the first timid applause was heard, followed by a standing ovation that grew in intensity. Each clap seemed to hammer home Richard's failure and humiliation. He realized, too late, that he had underestimated a family he had thought insignificant. And as the room cheered for Emily, he understood that no apology could erase this moment, and that he had just lost, in front of everyone, the image of a powerful and respected man that he had carefully cultivated. Sarah, moved, walked over to her daughter and hugged her, while Emily smiled, knowing that this silent confrontation had been a resounding and definitive victory. The ovation erupted through the room like an unexpected wave. The guests rose one by one, applauding Emily with admiration and astonishment. The murmurs turned into enthusiastic exclamations. Some spoke of her technical mastery, others of the raw emotion she had conveyed. Sarah, standing behind her, felt a mixture of pride and relief flood her heart. For years she had endured Richard Bates's humiliations, but tonight her daughter had transformed the pain into absolute triumph. Richard Bates, in the center of the room, was flushed with anger and shame. He tried to maintain his image as a powerful and respected man, but it was impossible. Every glance from the guests weighed on him like a reminder of his arrogance and past humiliations. His forced smile trembled, and he felt for the first time what it felt like to lose all authority in front of an entire audience. The media present at the gala, attracted by the exceptional performance, began filming and taking photos. Flashbulbs popped, immortalizing Emily at the height of her glory and Richard in his silent humiliation. Emily smiled softly, aware that this moment would remain etched not only in the memories of the guests, but also in newspapers and social media the next day. A guest approached Sarah and whispered, "Your daughter is amazing, you must be so proud." Sarah nodded, her voice trembling. "I've never been so proud of someone in my life." Emily, for her part, savored the respectful silence before leaving the stage. She knew her performance had exceeded her expectations. Not only had it dazzled the audience, but it had also sent an indelible message to the man who had dared to humiliate her mother. Richard Bates, publicly humiliated and confronted with his arrogance, felt the weight of his behavior for the first time. The evening would never be the same for him. And as the applause continued, Emily and her mother left the stage hand in hand, leaving behind a defeated director and a room conquered by music and dignity. By the next morning, Sarah and Emily's lives had already changed. Videos of Emily's performance were circulating on social media and going viral. Hundreds of comments praised her talent, her courage, and the masterful way she had humiliated Richard Bates without saying a single word. Sarah looked at her daughter with tears of pride. "Emily, you did something so amazing." Emily smiled, but remained humble. "I just said what we felt, Mom." With music. Richard Bates, meanwhile, was receiving calls and messages from work demanding explanations for his behavior at the gala. His arrogance had been exposed, and his image as a respected executive was quickly crumbling. Guests who had attended the performance everywhere told the same story. A waitress's daughter had brought a powerful man to his knees with her violin. For Emily and Sarah, it was a moment of sweet revenge. They hadn't sought to humiliate for the sake of it, they had simply meted out justice in an elegant and masterful manner. And now the whole world could see the power of dignity and talent in the face of arrogance and injustice. The newfound recognition also opened doors. Emily received offers to perform at prestigious concerts and to enter renowned music schools. As for Sarah, she felt a newfound confidence, knowing that no one would ever again be able to put her down with impunity. That evening, in their apartment, mother and daughter celebrated their silent victory. They knew it was only the beginning, but that from now on, their voices, or their music, would be heard and respected. The revenge hadn't been brutal or violent, but it had been perfect and final. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Sarah's lives changed dramatically. Videos of Emily's performance continued to circulate on social media, reaching millions of views. Local journalists and television stations came to interview the young prodigy and her mother. Emily, always humble, said, "I just played what I felt. Music can speak louder than words." Sarah added, "My daughter has shown that dignity and talent are more powerful than arrogance and injustice. I have never been so proud." Richard Bates, meanwhile, found himself isolated. His colleagues and professional contacts murmured about his arrogance and his failure at the gala. Some companies even cancelled partnerships with him, deeming his behavior unacceptable. The man who thought he controlled everyone had been confronted by the power of a determined and talented young woman. For Emily, opportunities were pouring in. Invitations to prestigious concerts, auditions at renowned music schools, and even offers of international scholarships were pouring in. She realized that her life had changed, not only because of her performance, but also because she had dared to stand up for her family with courage and grace. Sarah, for her part, finally felt free from the burden of the humiliation she had suffered for years. Her daughter had transformed their pain into victory, and now they were both respected and admired, not only by their loved ones, but by an entire town that had witnessed this silent revenge. The lesson was clear: dignity and talent can overthrow the most powerful, and injustice, when confronted with intelligence and courage, always ends up being revealed. A few months after the gala, Emily and Sarah had completely changed their lives. Invitations to prestigious concerts poured in for Emily, and she began performing at renowned venues in New York and internationally. Her now recognized talent had opened doors they had never imagined. Sarah, on the other hand, had regained her self-confidence. She had left the restaurant where Richard Bates still exercised his authority and found a job in a respectful establishment, where she was valued and respected for her work. For the first time in years, she felt that her dignity was preserved and respected. As for Richard Bates, he tried to resume his role as an arrogant director, but the memory of his public fall followed him everywhere. His colleagues and clients could no longer forget how he had been humiliated by a teenage girl and her violin. His power was permanently damaged, and his reputation remained tarnished by this momentous event. Emily, gazing at her mother, understood that true victory lay not only in bringing down Richard, but in showing that courage, talent, and dignity can transform injustice into triumph. Every performance she gave reminded everyone who listened of this lesson: respect must be earned, and no amount of arrogance can stand up to determination and quiet justice. Mother and daughter walked hand in hand through Central Park, exuding freedom and pride. They knew their story would inspire others to stand up for what was right, to use their talents to assert themselves, and to never let arrogance crush their dignity. The world had changed for them, but more importantly, their outlook on life had changed. Emily's music had transformed humiliation into resounding triumph, and now nothing and no one could ever make them feel small or powerless again.